Welcome back. So today we're jumping right into a brand new explainer, and we're looking at a piece of source material that has absolutely exploded online. We're talking well over 1 million views. The topic? It's that incredibly heavy, almost suffocating burden of religious guilt and habitual behavior. I mean, we've all been there, right? We've all experienced the sheer frustration of trying to break a bad habit. But when you stack spiritual weight on top of that, it can literally feel crushing. The material we're unpacking today is called What If I Can't Stop Sinning, and it dissects this exact crisis. We're going to map out why this happens, and more importantly, we'll look at a massive theological perspective shift the source offers to actually break us out of that despair. Let's get into it. Right out of the gate, the source confronts a genuinely terrifying question. If you've ever had persistent bad habits that made you doubt your own salvation, this is exactly the thought that keeps you up at 2 a.m. Here it is. Is my struggle proof that I'm actively fighting a battle, or is my constant failure proof that I'm just entirely fake? It is such a paralyzing question, because if you're stuck in this loop, doing the very thing you absolutely hate, your brain, and as the source points out, negative spiritual narratives, will try to convince you that your faith just isn't real at all.
So to really understand this fear, the source points to a very specific, super painful reality called the cycle of shame. And honestly, this is exactly why you end up feeling like an imposter or a total fraud in your spiritual life. This isn't just about feeling a little bit guilty for a mistake. No, this is a deep psychological and spiritual loop that completely degrades your sense of identity. You actually start to believe that because your behavior isn't 100% perfect, your core identity is totally corrupted.
You can see how this cycle acts like this exhausting trap. Look at step 1. You promise God, never again. And the real tragedy, you genuinely mean it. You mean it with the same fiery passion as a doomed New Year's resolution. But then, obviously, comes step 2. You fall again to the exact same habit. And that failure just instantly triggers step 3, which is this overwhelming, crushing wave of guilt that spirals right into doubting your salvation. You don't just think, oops, I made a mistake. You think, I am fundamentally broken and I am totally separated from grace. But here's where things get really interesting. To actually shatter this devastating cycle, the source introduces a massive paradigm shift. It totally reframes how we view these internal spiritual battles. It's called the dead corpse theory. And rather than obsessing over the failure itself, this theory asks us to look really closely at the friction we're experiencing. It completely flips the script from, my guilt means I'm lost, to, wait, my guilt actually means something entirely different. The central idea here is dead corpse theology, and it makes a surprisingly logical point. A completely dead entity literally cannot fight back. Think about it. A dead corpse doesn't feel pain, it doesn't feel friction, and it absolutely does not feel conviction or any desire to be better. So the source argues that the very fact that you are experiencing this intense internal struggle, the fact that you actively hate the bad habit you're doing, is actually rock-solid evidence of spiritual life. If your faith were truly dead, you wouldn't feel the agonizing friction of guilt in the first place. You'd just be completely numb to it. Just look at the stark contrast between these two states. On one side, you have the dead corpse. It doesn't resist, it feels zero conviction, and there is absolutely no desire to change. But on the other side, the living spirit. It experiences intense struggle and actively hates the wrong that's being committed. The source is essentially arguing that the struggle itself is your proof of life. The pain you feel over your failure, that isn't proof that you're a fake. It's actually the ultimate proof that your spirit is alive and violently rejecting the thing that's harming it. Now, this isn't just some modern psychology trick. The explainer actually grounds this whole concept in historical and biblical text, specifically zooming in on the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7. And this is huge because it takes the modern believer's struggle and ties it directly to one of the most foundational figures in the entire Christian faith. Basically, it's telling you, hey, you are not uniquely broken. By citing Romans 7, the source reminds us of Paul's famous lament, which basically goes, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. I mean, that perfectly captures it, right? It illustrates that even these massive biblical heroes experience this exact same agonizing duality, and they didn't lose their salvation over it. Paul was fighting a deep internal war between his earnest desire to do good and the frustrating, stubborn presence of bad habits in his flesh. Honestly, just knowing Paul fought this exact war should be a massive relief. Your battle doesn't disqualify you either. Okay, so even knowing this theology, the source warns that we still tend to fall into this massive, totally exhausting trap when we try to fix ourselves. Because, the second we realize we have a problem, our immediate human instinct is to just try and control it. We pivot to what the source cleverly calls the trap of sin management. And sin management is exactly what it sounds like. It's this grueling, exhausting attempt to control your behavior purely through sheer willpower. It's treating the symptom without ever actually addressing the root cause. You set up 100 strict rules, you block websites, you make these super rigid schedules, and you try to just white-knuckle your way to purity. But as the explainer points out, this is totally ineffective in the long run. Why? Because it relies 100% on your own finite human energy. And here is exactly why that white-knuckling approach backfires so spectacularly. First off, it leads to severe spiritual exhaustion. You just burn out. Second, it focuses entirely on your external behavior, leaving the internal desire totally unchanged. Third, because you will eventually slip up, it perpetuates that imposter syndrome we talked about earlier. And finally, and this is perhaps the most dangerous part according to the source, it allows the enemy to use your sheer fatigue as false proof of your defeat. You literally get so tired from managing your sin that you start believing you've already lost the war. But thankfully, the source doesn't just leave us hanging with the problem. It introduces what it sees as the ultimate solution for actually breaking the habit. If sin management is a total bust, what actually works? The answer presented here is heart displacement. And this is a fundamental shift. It's moving from constantly playing defense to finally playing offense in your spiritual life. True freedom, the source argues, doesn't come from obsessively managing the sin, it comes from displacing it entirely. Think of it like this. Sin management is trying to forcibly evict bad behaviors out of a room using just strict willpower. Heart displacement, on the other hand, is about flooding that room with something else so there is literally no space left for the bad behavior. You're focusing on changing the heart's foundational desires, filling it with positive spiritual truths, which naturally just pushes out the bad. You don't break a bad habit by staring at it all day. You break it by locking your eyes on something vastly superior. Towards the end, the source pivots to this highly empowered stance. It issues a direct challenge to those negative narratives, or what it calls the enemy, that constantly haunt believers. It totally shifts the tone. We move away from defense and guilt and step into a confident, authoritative reclaiming of spiritual identity. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that you have to aggressively reject these lies. Your struggle does not equal fake faith. It actually equals an active, living spirit. Your exhaustion, that is not a sign of final defeat. It just means you're in the trenches fighting. And most importantly, your salvation is not lost just because you are in an active battle. The source challenges us to stop apologizing for the struggle and to start recognizing it for what it truly is, the friction of a living soul refusing to surrender to the dark. So, we wrap up this explainer by turning the focus right back to you. We've looked at the cycle of shame, we've seen the historical context of Paul's struggle, and we've unpacked the absolute trap of trying to white-knuckle your way out of bad habits. So, knowing that a dead corpse doesn't fight, how are you going to view your own internal battles from now on? The next time you feel that agonizing weight of guilt, are you going to let it convince you that you're a fraud? Or will you recognize it as the undeniable proof that your spirit is very much alive and still fighting? Keep that in mind as you move forward.